Alright, this is a continuation of my astrology video through Ascendants. Yesterday we did the Gemini Ascendant as the last video. This time we're doing the Cancer Ascendant. What is the Cancer Ascendant? What is the Ascendant? First off, just as a recap, the Ascendant sign is the sign that was rising in the eastern horizon, specifically the degree of the zodiac sign that was rising on the eastern horizon at the moment of your birth. So if the eastern horizon sign rising was Cancer when you were being born, that is your rising sign. Because you can calculate everything else in the sky, every constellation, every house, from the position of the rising sign, what ends up happening is that the rising sign sets the path that the house system takes throughout your life and throughout your day, and that basically becomes the map of your life. So the first house always corresponds to Aries, which corresponds to your goals and your ambitions. The second house always corresponds to Taurus, which is your material possessions, your wealth, etc., the things you like. The third house always corresponds to Gemini, your communication and your speaking patterns. So all of these things line up around a particular sign, and it shifts the path of your life. So it becomes the backdrop, so all of your planets fall within a particular house. And we'll get into that more later, but for now, what happens when you have a Cancer Ascendant? So, having Cancer Ascendant, Cancer in the first house, means, first and foremost, that your primary objective in your life is to achieve a state of material security and a state of material comfort and emotional stability. This is a pretty hard life path as far as life paths go. There's a lot of things one must do in this Ascendant, whereas, like, if you remember in my video on the Taurus Ascendant, their goal is to achieve a certain level of material comfort and happiness. The Cancer Ascendant is different, even though it deals with similar things. It deals more with the emotions, the home, and you can think of Cancer like Taurus squared, because Taurus is the second sign and Cancer is the fourth sign. And when you have something like that, a situation where a house plus a house equals another house, you end up getting sort of an elevated version of that house. So Cancer is like Taurus in that it seeks material stability, but it seeks the epitome of material stability, the higher self. It's like the higher self of Taurus. It wants all the things that make it feel good as opposed to all the things that it likes. So there's a different level of intensity there when regarding like material security. Also, family. Cancer is definitely related to the family, and these people tend to have a lot of trials in their family, and tends to be related to they tend to have a life that makes them have to like repair damaged family bonds. So that is their orientation in this life, is to basically become emotionally stable and materially secure. Their second house, being Leo, is again always related to Taurus, but the Leo energy, these people tend to treat their clothes particularly like costumes, and they tend to, like, these will be people you'll see dressed like fashion people when they're just out on the street. Like, they're typically very creatively well dressed and sort of eccentrically dressed, because their artistic sense goes into their aesthetics, which is a good place for it. Actually, their second house is pretty well placed. And also, these people can be generous with money. So if you see these people will typically be giving to like people who are homeless and stuff, and people who need it more than maybe the other ascendants would. These people's third house is ruled by Mercury. It's Virgo, and these people typically are pretty analytical in their thinking, and they're typically pretty logical. Although Virgo being in Gemini's house, these two Mercury energies kind of clash sometimes, because Gemini is about concepts and Virgo is about facts. So these people can sometimes get a little frustrated and tongue-tied in their communication, trying to be too analytical, too logical, as opposed to just letting their communication flow and not being worried about whether they're being accurate or not. These people also put a big emphasis on the truth because their third house is Virgo, and they get really bothered when people lie because they have a hard time lying, because their heart is kind of right out on their sleeve. Cancer being ruled by the moon, and the moon basically being your emotional reaction to things. Their fourth house is Libra, and these people like to keep their home basically looking like a gem. They like to make sure everything's very clean, and they like to have like basically all the things that they need to feel stable in their home, because that's energy is ruled by Venus. So wherever Venus is placed for these people are going to take energy from that regarding their home. The fifth house of these people is Scorpio. So fifth house is your creative and your aesthetics. So these people tend to, and Scorpio is a sign of dark, deep research and trying to understand everything, including the things that people say you're not supposed to understand. That's the difference between Scorpio and Sagittarius. So Sagittarius wants to learn the culture's beliefs or a culture's beliefs. So these people like going to school. Scorpio says, fuck school, I'm going to try to figure out what's real on my own and go where the action is and learn. Being the fifth house in Scorpio, these people tend to like art that is very dark. They tend to like music that is very dark and intense. So they might like a lot of metal and like death metal and like screaming metal, or music that is just incredibly intensely emotional. The sixth house of these people is Sagittarius, so being ruled by Jupiter, the house of enemies being ruled by Jupiter, who's basically a benevolent cultural figure, kind of like Santa Claus or something, the positive element of culture. These people don't like fighting, although they are very good at it, but they tend to not like it, so they tend to rather keep the peace. Even though they could be physically intimidating, they don't care to fight. They'd rather just educate somebody as to why they're being stupid, if they are being annoying or stupid or something like that. So the seventh house of these people in their relationship sector, this is Capricorn, and because these people's primary objective is security, their relationships tend to take time, because the seventh house is not only the house of partnerships and marriage, but it's the house of debts. So taking out debts with other people, because typically if two people enter into a relationship, one of them ends up in debt, and that's just the way things are. So, but that can get in the way of your security and your emotional state and your financial security. So these people tend to get married pretty late in life. In fact, I've seen this a lot. If people have a Cancer ascendant, they'll tend to think something's wrong with them, because Capricorn is ruled by the planet Saturn, and Saturn is a sign about anxiety and frustration and delays. So these people will try to do everything right, and then they'll wonder why they can't get a girlfriend or a boyfriend early in their life, before the age of 18 or something. And they'll get really annoyed because it's what am I doing wrong? I'm trying to be the best person I can be and fix my emotional state and become secure and stable. And all these idiots are running around having a bunch of sex, and I'm not getting anything. So these people can have pretty frustrated early lives. But the flip side of that is after the age of 30, they tend to be very happy in their marriage. But if they get married or form a relationship before the age of 30, it tends to fall apart. And sometimes it can fall apart pretty harshly, depending on the position of Saturn. So these people's eighth house is Aquarius, and because their eighth house is ruled by Saturn, they tend to age rather slowly, because the eighth house rules longevity. They also tend to be pretty scientific in terms of understanding deep research, and they tend to be analytical in terms of figuring stuff like that out, which is good. And they tend to take hidden knowledge and occult knowledge pretty seriously. as opposed to somebody who might just look at it and be like, that's all superstition, because their house of science is in the house of deep research and taboo research. So they tend to be interested in looking into areas of life that other people might not be interested in because they think they're useful. These people's ninth house is in the sign of Pisces, typically, and the ninth house is the house of religion and belief systems, and Pisces is related to religion and belief systems because it's ruled by Jupiter, but it's more related to imagination. So these people will tend to use their imagination to come up with new belief systems as opposed to like just adopting whatever the culture believes, or becoming eccentric. They will become very spiritual, and they will research sort of a lot of different belief systems and then use their imagination to come up with one, typically. These people's 10th house, which represents delays and work, is and your impact on the world, is Aries. So these people have a delayed sort of fight response because Aries represents your ability to fight and it represents your ability to compete. These people don't like competing unless it's absolutely necessary, and they don't like conflict. However, they will often work on conflict, particularly in private. So they'll be like, boxing in their room, or they'll be like practicing kickboxing or wrestling or something in case they need it to defend people, but they don't like it, and violence is usually a last resort. And that actually is good because it stops them from getting in trouble a lot. And also their work, it's best if these people work kind of in nature and in physically demanding jobs, because it helps them with their emotional state to work in physically demanding jobs. The 11th house of these people is Taurus. So this is a good placement for Taurus because 11th house represents scientific thinking and gains and expansion of your resource pool, whereas Taurus is like your savings. 11th house is adding to your savings, among other things. It also represents scientific thinking, but these people, they have their Aquarius sign in the 8th house, so their scientific thinking is covered by their deep research. So their 11th house tends to be, since it tends to be in Taurus, they tend to have a lot of financial gains over the course of their life, particularly after the age of 30, because the 11th house is co-ruled by Saturn. So they're going to get more gains after the age of 30, typically in terms of resources. And their 12th house, which represents nature, isolation, spirituality, all the things that Pisces represents, is Gemini. So when these people communicate, because they're essentially ruled by their emotions, they tend to communicate sort of sporadically, and they tend to just sort of say what they feel when they communicate, as opposed to like thinking everything through beforehand. I mean, they do think it through, but their words are sort of, like, the best way I can describe this is the words are sort of a vehicle for the unconscious mind to express itself. They're not like tools necessarily. So they're very honest people, and they say what they think and what they feel because their speech basically comes right out of their mind. So it can kind of just be generated. That's why these people have a very hard time lying, because their communication comes from their unconscious mind. And they also wear their heart right out on their sleeve, so it's hard to lie when you're exposing yourself to the world. So that is my video on the Cancer Ascendant, and the next video I make is going to be on the Leo Ascendant, so feel free to tune into that when I make it. Thanks.